Hello, and welcome to Unit 4. We're going to talk about cells, um, and we are going to talk a little bit about cell theory today in this lesson. So, the first thing that we need to talk about is in class, we watched this very short, 7 minute ish TED talk about the history of cell theory. There will be a link posted in Google Classroom for you to watch it if you were not here. But we're going to skip over that in this lesson and just kind of jump into the lecture part. So, um, in this particular activity or lesson, rather, uh, we are going to talk briefly about the things that make up a theory and then what cell theory actually is. So, in our case, we have a theory is an explanation for large amounts of um, facts, observations, um, about the natural world. And so that's what a theory essentially is. And then for the purposes of this particular lesson, we're going to talk about how we got there. So a long time ago in the 1600s, um, there were a few people who were kind of looking at cells under microscopes and just trying to figure out what that actually meant or what was what. One of the first people, not necessarily the first, but one of the first people was Robert Hooke. Um, and he was actually the first person that we credit with observing cells. And so, what he looked at specifically was a piece of cork, and he saw tiny, tiny boxes. Now, those boxes um, were were just kind of like this little situation here. They were really right next to each other. They were mostly the same size, but they reminded him of the rooms that monks lived in monasteries. And those rooms in monasteries that monks lived in were referred to as cells back in that point in time. So he named the little boxes that he saw in the cork cells. And then a little bit earlier than that, we had von Lee Antoine Leeuwenhoek, and he looked at protists in algae, and he also made a really, 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 really good microscope lens. Moving forward, leading us up to 1855, which is when cell theory really kind of like took off. Um, there was Matthias Schleiden. He was a German botanist, and if you're not sure what a botanist is, it's basically a scientist that studies plants. And we still have botanists today, and they are constantly studying plants and searching for ways that plants can help us um, in the world. What his biggest contribution to cell theory was is that he said that after looking at lots of plants under a microscope, he said that all plants are made of cells. Next individual that we're going to talk about is uh, Theodor Schwann. And he was a German zoologist. And a zoologist is a person that studies, or in his case, studied animals. So he studied animals, and we still have zoologists, but they're more specialized in just studying than he was. They might study very specific types of animals. Um, all his contribution to cell theory was that all animals are made of cells. And he came to that conclusion by looking at a lot of microscope slides of lots of different animals and noticed that cells were present in each of them. Then we had finally Robert Virchow, who was a German physician, which is just kind of a fancy name for doctor. And he stated,
Clay, please report to the office. Stacy Clay, please report to the office.
he stated that all cells come from other cells. Now, not everybody agreed with this particular part of the cell theory at the time, and that was okay because eventually we got to the point where that was proven to be 100% accurate or true. Now, here are the three parts of the cell theory that you're going to be responsible for being able to explain or identify or know. First of all living things, not just plants, not just animals, but all living things are made of cells. And so the criteria we're talking, when I say criteria, I'm still talking about the 7 criteria for life that we covered in the last unit. So remember, those 7 criteria were metabolism and homeostasis and reaction to stimuli, reproduction, and drawing a blank, reproduction, heredity, cellular organization, and I'm missing one. What am I missing? Growth and development. Yeah, growth and development. But in this case, all living things are made of cells. I would think that this criteria would most likely fall under cellular organization. And so that would be the one criteria that I would use for that. Cells are an organism's basic unit of structure and function. And the criteria that I would use to classify that would probably be metabolism and perhaps homeostasis. The last part of cell theory that you need to be responsible for having some type of understanding of is cells only come from other cells. And the criteria here, I would say, would probably be growth and development, and perhaps heredity. So those are the parts of cell theory that you're going to be able to, or need to be able to talk about or discuss and go over. Now, this particular diagram here says cells are basic units of structure and function, and I do want to take a moment or two to talk a little bit about what that means. So cell jobs are things like homeostasis and reproduction and metabolism and heredity. But to review, homeostasis was talking about how cells maintain balance or regulate things in the cell. So balance or regulation. Oh man. Metabolism is how cells get energy. Reproduction is making new cells. And heredity is really discussing genetic information that a cell might have, if I can spell it correctly. All right. Now, the last thing we need to talk about in this particular lesson is some other basic things like all cells have organelles, which are smaller structures within every cell. And each organelle has its own job or function, and those organelles work together, performing the work of the cell in order to support the function of the cell. Like, what is a cell's job? An example of that would be cell membrane helps maintain homeostasis by controlling what enters and exits the cell. And we're going to spend some more time talking about the different organelles and their functions over the course of the next few days. But this is just an introduction to cell theory. And once you've got this all filled in, if you have any questions, please touch base with your teacher. Have a good afternoon.